Welcome to the Long John podcast with your host, Joseph Camperman, coming at you today with episode 14 titled Big Questions for the 2023 NFL Season. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to kick off this episode. This episode will air tomorrow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But right now, you're catching me live on YouTube and Twitter. Twitter at the Long John Pod and YouTube at the Long John Podcast. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. I'm going to get kicked off, but of course, before I get kicked off for this titled episode, I will note that I did not include any NBA Finals information into this episode because right now we are looking at a potential win tonight if Denver can win at home against the Miami Heat. Currently, as we speak, it is 2 minutes 51 in the game left in the first quarter, and the score is 16-18. It appears the Heat have just made a run. So we will see where that ends us up at. I will give a brief update towards the end of the show. But without further ado, I want to get kicked off on some of the most pressing topics in the NFL, in my opinion, this year. And it's going to really range from some interesting quarterback questions to scheduling questions to which rookie QB is more likely to make the playoffs. So tune in for this entire episode. You do not want to miss these 7 topics that I have here for tonight. And with that being said, I'm going to be moving on to topic number 1. Will the Aaron Rodgers experience be a success? So, of course, this is a huge question. Starting in the early part of March, Aaron Rodgers was still with the Green Bay Packers. We didn't really know when he would be traded to the New York Jets, which is what the rumors were kept circling. They seemed to be the front runners. They ultimately ended up landing him for a net of picks and a few other, for really a net of picks. It really was a win-win in my opinion for both teams. The Jets didn't have to give up a whole lot, and ultimately they potentially get a quarterback for a year or two. They seem to be going all out. The biggest question that I have, at least for this team, is can they get through the brutal beginning of their schedule? So at the beginning of their schedule, they're playing, and of course this is in no particular order, but Bills, Cowboys, Buffalo Bills, Dallas Cowboys, Kansas City Chiefs, and the Philadelphia Eagles 4 of their first 6 weeks. That is a brutal beginning to the schedule. It seems like the schedule makers have made a few of these brutal schedule openers when you're looking at those first 6 games. I don't know if this is a team that could very well go 3-3. It's not going to put you behind in your divisional race maybe, but it could put you behind in a top AFC seed race. And because, I do believe that there are other teams that are going to vie for those top seeds, the schedule is a huge question. And so if this schedule is going to, cripple them, is this a possibility this team gets a 3rd seed? That would obviously mean winning the division. Or do they get a seed like 5, 6, or 7? And can they win against some of the greats? And it's a really big question. I will say that the schedule does get easier, weeks 7 through 17. They have some difficult matchup. They obviously play the Bills, the Dolphins twice, and the Chargers in those 11 games. However, I would say of those 11 games, only 4 of them are particularly really difficult. So, of course, if they go 7-4 and they win, 4 of the first 6 games, you could see them go 11-6. And that's probably going to get you a playoff berth in this very difficult AFC conference. Or you could see it get you or you could potentially win the division if the Bills and the Dolphins don't win that many games, which I think would be highly unlikely. My thought is for all 3 of these teams in the division, and I hate to totally throw away the New England Patriots, but right now they don't look like they're anywhere close in talent to any of these 3 teams, specifically the Dolphins and the Bills. And so my question is a 12-5 team winning this division? I would almost argue to say that a 13-4 team is going to win this division. And so that's really tough, especially with those 4 of the first 6 matchups as tough as they are. However, assuming there's no trades, this team is really talented. Of course, they've got Aaron Rodgers at the helm, but he is surrounded by a heck of a receiving core and offensive core in that matter. So Breece Hall is his running back. Of course, assuming Breece Hall comes back and he doesn't have that bad of an injury hiccup, beginning the season. We don't know when he's going to be starting after he did miss a large portion of last season with the ACL tear. There are question marks on whether he can get back to the form he was on when he was really on track to potentially win Offensive Rookie of the Year. But at receiver, Rodgers hasn't made Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, Corey Davis, Mecole Hardman, Tyler Conklin, and at tight end, as well as CJ Uzomah. That is about as talented of a wide receiver core as he's ever had. Now, I don't want to throw shade on the Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, and Devontae Adams trio that he had for a little while, but this is a very, very good receiving core, and I would argue that this is the best receiving core he's had since that trio. Not the best receiver, the best receiving core. And so, of course, if this O-line can be good, with Mekhi Becton, Dwayne Brown, Joe Tippin, Elijah Vera-Tucker, and Laken Tomlinson, my thought is, I know there's questions about whether Mekhi Becton can be a good tackle or not. I really liked the Joe Tippin pick. I was high on him at center. And, of course, you've got your guards at Elijah Vera-Tucker and Laken Tomlinson. This O-line could be very, very good. This is a division that has some tough defenses. The Bills don't look like they're going away on defense. They look like they could be getting better, as well as the Dolphins have a very, very tough defense. So this is going to be tough. Can this offense, put up a lot of points, which is what I believe a lot of these games are going to be, very, very high-scoring affairs. And can the defense hold up their end of the bargain? This defense is highlighted by guys like Carl Lawson, Quinnen Williams, C.J. Mosley, Quincy Williams, Sauce Gardner, D.J. Reed, Chuck Clark, Jordan Whitehead. This is a very, very talented Jets team. The real question is coaching going to propel them forward or hold them back? They've got a defensive-minded head coach, and I typically would say that's not a good move. It's very rare for a defensive-minded head coach to get to the Super Bowl and win. We've obviously seen Sean McDermott not able to get ahead of guys like Andy Reid, Zach Taylor. These guys are offensive geniuses. I would say Andy Reid more so than Zach Taylor, but both offensive coaches. Is a defensive coach going to be the downfall of the Jets? Or the next question is, will we see a Matthew Stafford scenario or a Russell Wilson scenario? And I know that's a little bit broad and maybe a little unfair for some of you guys, but Matthew Stafford came into a very, very talented Los Angeles Rams team and played very well and ultimately won them the Super Bowl in his inaugural season. Now, they lost a lot of players after the Super Bowl, and they did not play well. But that was partially because he was injured. Cooper Kupp was injured. There was a lot of injuries across the team. Russell Wilson, on the other hand, everyone had him as a top, everyone had the Broncos in the top 5 potential Super Bowl teams, and this Broncos team was terrible last year. You could partially blame that on coaching, but I think a large portion is because Russell Wilson was just let to run and do whatever he wants. And I think Russell Wilson still needs to be coached. And I think hopefully at the core of his heart, he also realizes that. So, of course, this division is also incredibly difficult. You've got the Miami Dolphins, the Buffalo Bills, and then a New England Patriots team, which isn't terrible, but I don't think will challenge them too much. The real question is this division as difficult as the Broncos? And I think so. I think, when you look at it, the Broncos have the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Broncos and the Raiders. I would maybe argue this division is potentially harder. Okay, but if you're sitting as the Chiefs, you've got, I could potentially see if you're the Broncos, this is a harder division. If you're like comparing the Broncos to I know this is unfair, but comparing the Broncos to the Jets have to play, Patriots, Bills, and Dolphins. The Broncos have to play Chiefs, Chargers, and Raiders. I would almost argue that the being in the Jets' shoes is harder than being in the Broncos' shoes. So, there's a lot of question marks surrounding this team. And I'm going to tell you right now, I think the Rodgers experience will be a success, but I don't think they're winning this division. I think that very well this division could represent 3 teams in the AFC conference in the playoffs. I think that's not out of the question, being that there are 7 teams allowed in the division, in the playoffs on the AFC side, 7 teams allowed. 4 teams obviously are division winners, but I could see 2 of the 3 wildcard teams being teams from this division. So, it's a tough one, But I would say that, yes, the Rodgers experience will be a success, but it's going to not be a success like a 13-4 season, 12-5 season. I could see this team winning 11 plus games, but I don't think they win more than that. I mean, 11 games, but I don't know if they're going to win more than that. Segueing into topic number 2, which I really am excited about, and this question I think has been brought up a lot in the last couple of weeks. Will Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts live up to their contract expectations? So we'll start with the with Jalen Hurts and the Eagles first. There was a lot of pressure on this team. Of course, they just went to the Super Bowl, so that does not help. But they went to the Super Bowl and they played relatively well in the Super Bowl and phenomenal leading up to it. And the whole question was, oh, it's an easy schedule. That was one of the biggest critics last year, was Jalen Hurts and the Eagles were successful because of this easy schedule. And I will say that the NFL schedule makers didn't make this any easier. Every time you win the Super Bowl, let alone win your division, you're going to have a harder time playing teams more than likely, because you get matched up to the same division winners in the NFL. And so with that being said, the Eagles have the hardest schedule by strength of teams. This doesn't mean a whole lot. I think people, including myself at times, put a lot of weight on this. However, a good example is the Los Angeles Rams would have been considered a very good team in the 2021-2022 season, but they landed flat on their face in the 2022-2023 season, and they missed the playoffs. So what I will say about that is, yes, the strength of schedule due to the strength of teams is important to look at, but it's not the only reason why a team is going to struggle in a year. The one thing that I will give Howie Roseman and the Eagles is they did a phenomenal job replacing starters that they lost in free agency. And I'm not going to go through the list of starters. Please do check out my episode that aired last week. I go through a list of the Eagles starters that they replaced, that they lost in free agency, and who they brought in. A good example is they lost Javon Hargrave. They bring in arguably one of the best defensive players in the draft if he can stay out of trouble in Jalen Carter. They also take a flyer, and I think a flyer that's going to pan out on Nolan Smith after he dropped far in the draft. So this is a good team. Those are 2 guys they drafted that I think will immediately contribute. So the ultimate question behind it, the ultimate really statement I would say behind this is the ball is in Hurts' court. And that probably sounds a little redundant because, yes, he's the quarterback. He's the leader of the team. But if he has a solid season, then I think he will live up to his contract. And, of course, that's also a little redundant because any quarterback having a solid season will live up to his contract. But the big thing that I have to say to this is he doesn't need to win 15 games. He doesn't need to win 14 games. He just needs to play well in the games that people expect to be tough. And some of those games include the Kansas City Chiefs, the Buffalo Bills, the 49ers, the Dallas Cowboys. Those are games that if he just comes out and has 4 interception games, I would say no, he's not living up to the contract expectation in year 1. I think he's going to live up to the contract expectation. I'm going to go into more detail in that in the next couple of topics. However, I don't think he needs to win as many games as a lot of the media is going to say in order for him to live up to those expectations. So moving on to Lamar Jackson, the big key here is he has to stay healthy. He has played 24 of 35 possible games the last 2 years, and that includes a playoff loss last year in the playoffs. So, of course, he's played 12 games on average 12 games the last 2 years, and then he's also missed that, so he's missed a combined 10 games in the regular season and 1 game in the playoff. And, of course, his argument, which was valid, was, who did I have? What were the Ravens doing to support me? Well, I will say this. There's no denying that the Ravens have the talent now. And there's no denying that Lamar Jackson has the talent. The Ravens finally gave him even more talent this year with the additions of wide receiver Zay Flowers out of Boston College. They drafted last year with the additions of, drafted this year with the additions of Odell Beckham, who was a free agent. They now pair those 2 receivers with Mark Andrews, J.K. Dobbins, and Rashad Bateman. So I will say that, yes, I think the Ravens said, look, we're going to commit money to you, and we're going to commit more stars to you, more future stars. So, yes, I think the ball now is also very much similar to Lamar's court. Can he stay healthy? Now, I will say this. Their end of schedule is brutal, which is not what a lot of teams want to see. Their end of schedule is tough, like I said, playing the Chargers, the Jaguars, the 49ers, and the Dolphins the last 6 weeks. They've got to win 4 of those games, in my opinion, if they want to make the playoffs in a good seed. Winning the division is also really tough. I have the Bengals as one of the tougher teams this year. If they can't win at least one game against the Bengals, I don't know if this is a team that can win the division. So I would say that, look, I think there's an avenue for them to win 11 games with their schedule. And that makes them a playoff contender. But does it make them a division contender? Not at 11 games. I think that they're going to have to win at least 12, if not 13 games or more to compete with the Bengals, a team that I just think that offense is so high-powered that even though the Bengals have some question marks at defense, I would be hard-pressed to say the Bengals are not at least going to push for 12 wins. So, yes, a lot of pressure rides on the Ravens. My opinion with the Ravens is Lamar has got to stay healthy for more than 12 games. I'm not opposed if he misses a game this coming season, but missing 5 games in a 17-game season, I mean, you're looking at, almost a third of the games. It's not fair. It's not fair to the team. And it's really not fair to Lamar himself. That contract is put in place because it shows faith that the Ravens have in him that he will stay healthy. Now, ultimately, it also means how are the Ravens playing him? If they run him a million times a game, he's going to get dinged up. So I think it goes both ways. Lamar's got to play smart. The Ravens have also got to coach smart and give him plays that are smart. So my opinion with both of these quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, are yes, they're going to live up to those expectations. But health is important for Lamar, and Jalen Hurts has to come through in those big games and come through in a big way. And that's a perfect way to segue into topic number 3, which is talking about a very, very injury-prone quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo. So the topic number 3 is, will Jimmy Garoppolo be on the Raiders roster in week 1? Now, I will say this. Some people are going to be going, what? Well, I will say this. The Las Vegas Raiders made a big signing in Jimmy Garoppolo that a lot of people thought was a bridge quarterback. And I'll get to that later on in this topic. However, a report surfaced at the end of May that stated that Jimmy failed his physical with the team, and they therefore had to rework the contract to include an injury clause. And part of that injury clause means that if Garoppolo re-injures his left foot, the Raiders can cut him free of any of the guarantees in his contract. Excuse me. But it has to be that left foot. So if he injures his right foot, if he injures his ribs, if he separates his shoulder, those guarantees remain intact. But that's a big deal for a starting quarterback because it's a bit rare nowadays for a team to say, look, we're going to pay you all this money, but if you re-injure that foot, we can cut you. And I think it was a wise move on the Las Vegas Raiders. The part that blows my mind is that they passed on trading up for Bryce Young, trading up for C.J. Stroud, trading up for Anthony Richardson. They also passed on selecting Will Levis later on in the draft, Hendon Hooker. So I believe that shows that Garoppolo, that Josh McDaniels has faith in the Garoppolo. I mean, I think that if he didn't have faith in Garoppolo, they would have drafted at least Hendon Hooker or Will Levis, right? But that contract, Addendum G, becomes null and void if Garoppolo passes his physical and is active for at least one regular season game and does not suffer a re-injury to his left foot. So it's an interesting scenario. If he's active for at least one season game, he passes his physical, and he doesn't re-injure his left foot, he's good to go. So to answer your question, he may not start week 1. As long as he plays one season game and passes his physical before the end of the year, they can keep him, and they would have to keep him and paying that guaranteed money. So it does go both ways. It's not totally one-sided. However, what blew my mind was a report that surfaced earlier on, about a week ago, by Paul Gutierrez from ESPN, that the Las Vegas Raiders could turn to no other than another injury-prone quarterback, Carson Wentz, currently a free agent, if quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo's foot injury isn't ready for the season. So I have to laugh here and chuckle because I, as an Eagles fan, had a soft spot in my heart for Carson Wentz and do believe he receives a lot of hate for an injury that, was a freak injury, and then I believe the Eagles medical staff did him dirty in a way with his back injury. So I'm not entirely blaming all of it on Carson Wentz, but these are two injury quarterbacks. Why would you go out and sign a guy like Carson Wentz who is injury prone if you already have as a potential backup another injury prone quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo? So that is an interesting story to keep an eye on. I think it's very important to realize that Jimmy Garoppolo is the answer for the Las Vegas Raiders this year. It's a 3-year contract, but I believe the first 2 years are very burdensome for the team. So we're not going to see them move on from him likely after this season unless he does re-injure that foot. He is a good bridge quarterback. I believe the quarterback class next year is going to be much better. You've got the likes of Caleb Williams and a few other players, the quarterback from UNC. So my opinion with this scenario is the Raiders have basically said, look, if you get us through this year, we'll consider bringing you back and continuing to have you as the starting quarterback. However, if you injure this foot, we could cut you at the flip of a wrist. It does not matter what we do. We can cross through your contract and we can make it null and void. But they also gave Garoppolo the ability to get hurt in a different fashion without losing those guarantees. So I think that that's probably why he was a little bit more keen on signing with the team. They said, look, we don't want you to re-injure that foot. But if you injure another portion of your body, you can still keep those guarantees. So it's an interesting scenario that the Raiders find themselves in. The ultimate question is if Richardson, if Bryce Young, if CJ Stroud, if maybe Will Levis all go off this year, which Will Levis is probably, we'll get to that later, will the Raiders regret not at least trying to get into the top 4 and getting one of those guys? And that still remains to be seen, and it's still a big question mark that is not going to be answered until we see some of these rookie quarterbacks play. And I'm going to talk about that later on in the show. So for me personally, I think this Garoppolo experiment is going to be a disaster. I don't see the Raiders being, they've got Josh Jacobs, who's got some contract issues. They've got a good-ish defense with two guys, the two bookends, and Max Crosby and Chandler Jones. Excuse me. Those two guys are good. Devonta Adams and Josh Jacobs, great offense. If you can keep Josh Jacobs, he's got some contract disputes. I don't see this Las Vegas Raiders team being very, very competitive in this stacked AFC. So that completes topic number 3. Moving on to topic number 4 is probably one of the most pressing topics of the year. And I know I keep saying this, but which team will shock the NFL this year and be better or worse? So I'm going to start with the better. And this one's probably going to come as a little bit of a surprise, but I'm going to say the Carolina Panthers. And before people go, whoa, this is a shock. It may not happen, but I could see it happening. And part of the reason is because they have a new QB and a great coaching staff. And I will say this. I live in North Carolina. There are a lot of Panthers fans who were very, 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 very worried that the Panthers would pass on Bryce Young and pick another quarterback when Bryce Young was the most NFL ready. They didn't do that. But what they did better before even getting Bryce Young was their coaching decisions. And their coaching decisions considered of hiring Frank Reich as their head coach. Then they get Thomas Brown, a very well-respected person, as their offensive coordinator. They get their QB's coach, Josh McCown. Personally, I think Josh McCown is going to be a head coach in the next 3 to 5 years. On defense, they got Ejiro Evero on defense as defensive coordinator. Dom Capers is defensive assistant. This is a stacked coaching tree. I think that there are potentially 4 coaches on this team that could be head coaches in the next couple of years. And that's big for the Panthers. That means that these guys could help this team grow and grow in a good way. They also have a solid running back core with Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders from the Eagles. Their wide receiver core is strong. It's not great. It's strong. They've got Adam Thielen, DJ Chark, Terrence Marshall, and tight end Hayden Hurst. So, from an offensive standpoint, I think Bryce Young is really, really in a good position. Now, I think that they could go out and they could get a receiver. There's still DeAndre Hopkins out there. I think the Panthers want to win and they want to challenge this division. I think it's a good idea. Go get Hopkins, sign him to a 2-year deal. Let that 2-year deal be backloaded to where next year you pay him a little bit more money. And maybe you try to find a trade partner if he has a good year and you just don't want to pay him more than if you think he's not worth it. But structure the contract to be team friendly, but also give him the money he wants. If the Panthers were to get a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, I think automatically they become not just a favorite to win the division, but definitely a team that could make waves in the playoffs. I don't think it's out of the question. These coaches have experience coaching in the playoffs. Frank Reich has experience coaching as a offensive coordinator in a Super Bowl, which he won with the Eagles. So yes, this is a good team. Their O-line is solid with a guy like Ekwonu at the helm. This is an O-line that I think will definitely help Bryce Young. It's probably got a few areas that they could improve, but overall, this O-line is not in shambles. On defense, they're very, very strong. They've got guys like Shaq Thompson, Brian Burns, Frankie Louvu. Frankie Louvu is great at safety. Shaq Thompson is an amazing edge rusher. So is Brian Burns. Shaq Thompson is very much of a hybrid player. They can throw him all over the field. J.C. Horn is a great cornerback. Even though he struggled with injuries, there's a lot of potential there. Von Bell, Xavier Woods at safety, Jeremy Chin at safety. These guys are good. And I think this team could very easily win 10-plus games. If you're winning 10-plus games in this division, I think as the AFC South, NFC South, you can more than likely make the playoffs and potentially win the division with 10-plus wins. And I think that that's what they're going to do. I really think this team is going to shock the NFL, and I think there's a real avenue for them to win a playoff game this year. I know it's crazy to say this with a rookie quarterback, but I have a lot of faith in Bryce Young and with this coaching staff and with this young team, with this good offense and defense that they have put together. This is a very big team that I think could do a lot in the NFL in the next couple of years. Now, for worse, I'm going to pick on a team that I don't think a lot of people would normally pick on, and that's the Los Angeles Chargers. I want to say that I'm not sold on their head coach. I don't like him. I really don't. I don't think that the Los Angeles Chargers head coach, I think that he's just Bradley. My opinion on Brandon Staley is I think he's holding back the development of his quarterback, Justin Herbert, because I know when people say, oh my God, the Chargers, you don't think they're going to be good? No, I think that Justin Herbert is a phenomenal quarterback, but outside of their running back and wide receiver core, my question is their defense strong enough to win is their defense strong enough to withstand in-game deficits? Like if this team is down by 21 points, can this defense help the offense out by giving them an opportunity to come back into the game? Now, look, they have some serious studs on defense. They have guys like edge rushers like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. They have cornerbacks like Asante Samuel Jr., J.C. Jackson, safeties like Derwin James. But their conference is brutal. Teams that are better than them, in my opinion, and of course, this is going to sound a little bit bold, but teams that could be better than them this year because they have the 12th hardest schedule. Kansas City Chiefs, Cincinnati Bengals, Buffalo Bills, and Miami Dolphins. I don't think anyone would really argue with me that any of those four teams would be better than them. Okay, so then you say, okay, pick their team number 5, 5th seed. That's still a good seed. But here's two other teams that I think could be flyers to be better than them. And a lot of people are going to or 3 teams even, that it could be flyers to be better than them. The Baltimore Ravens, a team that I am high on after the changes they made in the offseason. New York Jets, if this Aaron Rodgers experience truly does work, now that puts you at team number 6. Now you say, okay, well, 7th seed, they still can make it. What about the Jacksonville Jaguars? So, my opinion with this is the Chiefs, the Bengals, the Bills, and the Jags, and the Ravens could all be very much better than this team. And the Jets, potentially. And that leaves you as a 8th seed, and that leaves you out of the playoffs. So this is a stacked AFC conference. I'd say if this team was in the NFC, they're a shoo-in for the playoffs. And it's not to speak badly about NFC teams, but I think we can all recognize that the AFC is a better division, a better conference this year. So my opinion with this team is, look, they can make the playoffs, but it's not easy. They've got a tough schedule in the 12th hardest. They've also got teams that are a lot better than them in this conference. So that's my opinion on the state of the Chargers and the fact that they're going to shock the world and not live up to some of those expectations. But speaking of living up to expectations, topic number 5. Will the NFC East have a repeat division winner? So, of course, there's been a lot of talk when the last time the NFC has had a repeat division winner. And, of course, we all know this. The Eagles won the division. The Eagles won the division last year. The Cowboys the year before. But there has not been a repeat division winner, division champion, since 2005. 18 years. This is the longest active streak among divisions in the NFL, as well as the longest in NFL league history. Crazy stuff. There has never been a repeat team in the NFL that has gone 18 years without repeating. So my question, and the question that I have for topic number 5 is, will the NFC East have a repeat division winner? Well, I'll tell you this right now. The schedule makers really are making it hard for us to even have any idea on whether this team, whether the Eagles will be repeat. So my thought is this, and this is my first statement. The Cowboys, the Giants, and the Eagles have 3 of the top 5 hardest schedules by strength of schedule in the NFL. The Giants still have question marks, in my opinion, at wide receiver. The real question is, can Dak Prescott push this team into the playoffs? I still think there's questions with his performance, especially in the playoffs. Now, that doesn't mean that matter towards division winner. However, the Cowboys play the Jets, the 49ers, and the Chargers in the beginning of the season. Their end of season is brutal, playing the Dolphins, Eagles, Bills, Seahawks, and Lions. Those are some of the games to end the season schedule. This is not an easy schedule for this team. The Eagles, on the other hand, have an easier start to the season, but a brutal middle of the schedule, which I talked about last week, where they play the Cowboys, the Chiefs, the Bills, the 49ers, and the Seahawks. And that's in order. Those are 5 brutal games. And I personally don't know, can the Eagles, with a stretch like that, maintain a division lead if they start well in the division? I think what's important from the Eagles standpoint is they have got to start with almost a 5-0, 6-0 record if they want to afford losing maybe 2 of those middle season games. The Giants have a brutal start to the season. This is where I would almost rule the Giants out, and I'll get to that here in a second. The Giants start to the schedule, and this is in no particular order: Cowboys, 49ers, Dolphins, Seahawks, and Bills in the first 7 games. 5 of those 7 games are teams that were not only playoff teams, but also very good teams. And what I will say this is, and I will not just say very good teams last year, also good teams going into this year. I know Skylar Thompson was the quarterback for the Dolphins in this playoff matchup. I want to scratch that for the Dolphins, but the Dolphins are going to be a good team this year. I think everyone can agree with that, especially with this offense that they have, which is crazy good. And if they add a guy like Dalvin Cook, this offense could be one of the best in the NFL. But my opinion is this: it's all about how you start. It's not necessarily about how you start. It's all about how you finish. The Eagles have the easiest end to the schedule. The Cowboys have probably one of the harder. Sorry, the Eagles have the easiest end of the schedule. The Cowboys probably have the hardest end of schedule. My opinion is that the Cowboys and the Eagles will be the top 2 teams in this division. I just think that brutal start to the schedule for the Giants is going to put them out of division contender. However, I am going to say that for the first time since 2005, the NFC East will have a repeat division winner. And not just that, the Eagles are going to beat the Dallas Cowboys twice. Now, here's the deal. Last week, you saw me say they're going to drop one in Dallas, Jerry World. But I have a firm believer and a little bit of a change of heart in the last week. I really think the Eagles are going to win the games that they need to win to make this division, to make them repeat division winners. And of course, that's a little bold because the Cowboys are going to be a very tough team, but they also have a very tough schedule. And I think really it's going to be interesting. Both Dak Prescott and Jalen Hurts both will have to play big time in the big games if they want to have a chance at this division. So moving on to topic number 6, I've got a very interesting question that a lot of people are asking is, can anybody challenge the Kansas City Chiefs for AFC dominance? And I'm going to say this. I think it's easy to get caught up in the Chiefs are so good. From a player standpoint, they're good. From a coaching standpoint, they're great. And I believe coaching was a huge key and a very big reason on why they won the Super Bowl. I think everyone could agree with that. The offensive adjustments that were made at halftime for the Chiefs when they were down were the reason why they won the Super Bowl. The Eagles' lack of defensive judgments in the second half are the reason why the Eagles lost the Super Bowl. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason why the Chiefs are better than anybody else in the AFC. However, they have a middle of the row schedule, and they rank 16th as hardest schedule by strength of teams. Their schedule is broken up into two games where they only have a few difficult stretches. So when we look at like the Eagles, the Giants, the Cowboys, their schedules involve like 6 of 7 or 5 of 7 or even 4 of 7 really, really hard teams. Whereas the Chiefs have difficult stretches like the Jets and the Jags, the Dolphins and the Eagles, the Bengals and the Chargers. And you could throw in the Bills there, but it's not back-to-back games, especially like the Eagles, where they have a really, really tough back-to-back schedule. So my opinion is, look, there are 3 teams that can challenge them right now in the AFC. And that is the Cincinnati Bengals, because they have a high-powered offense. The Jaguars, because I believe they're a well-coached team. They're very talented. And I don't think we've seen the last of this young, very talented Jaguars team. They shocked the NFL last year by making as far as they did in the playoffs when no one probably at the beginning of the season even expected them to make it to the playoffs. On top of that, they've won games. They won playoff games. So that's the second team. And the third team that I have really challenging them is the Ravens. The Ravens have an experienced coaches, and they also have a retooled offense with experienced players. The Bills also are teams that can challenge them. At the end of the day, I'm going to say that even though I had a different Super Bowl team challenging this team, even though I had a different Super Bowl team other than the Chiefs, this year, I think offense is going to be a big question. They lost even more targets than they did last year. Last year he lost Tyreek Hill. We thought, is Patrick Mahomes going to do well? He ends up having an MVP season, and with guys like Mecole Hardman, Juju Smith-Schuster, Kadarius Toney. Well, he loses Smith-Schuster. He loses Mecole Hardman. Are those 2 losses going to be a huge issue, or can guys like Kadarius Toney step up? Can now Travis Kelce is more than likely even more of a favorite number 1 target for Patrick Mahomes? So that's a really, really big question that I have, and a question that's not really yet answered because I'm not entirely sure if I'm sold on the Chiefs offense. But I tell you what I am sold on, and that is Patrick Mahomes. This guy is the real deal. This coaching staff is the real deal. And the real question that everybody wants to know is who can challenge them. I don't know if there's a team that can challenge them, but I will say the Bengals, the Jaguars, the Ravens, and the Bills are 4 teams that I potentially could see them challenging for. But I think this schedule is going to make it really difficult for anyone to take away that number 1 seed crown from the Chiefs, just because they don't have these long stretches of very, very difficult teams. So finishing off this episode, I've got topic number 7. And this topic is probably going to be the one that every person who is a scouting, any type of person in the scouting departments is going to have their magnifying glass. For topic number 7, which rookie quarterback is more likely to make the playoffs? Now, I think I already probably insinuated towards it early on in the episode, in this episode, but I'm going to start focusing on the quarterbacks drafted. So starting with the 2 quarterbacks that we don't expect to be starters. Will Levis. He's currently listed behind Ryan Tannehill. This is Ryan Tannehill's last year. It is a lot of people's understanding that Ryan Tannehill is going to take over this team, be the starter this year, transition the keys over to Will Levis. The Titans have the 28th easiest schedule. If Will Levis does take over, as bad as this team is, I don't see him taking over and leading them for a playoff push, because if he takes over, I think it's going to be late enough in the season to where there's no way he can actually be credited for helping them make the playoffs. As far as Hendon Hooker goes, he lands in a great spot because he lands in a spot where he doesn't have to start, just like Will Levis. Jared Goff, my question that I have is, will Jared Goff even allow Hendon Hooker to have snaps? The Detroit Lions have the 20th easiest schedule. You guys saw that I had them as my flyer for representing one of two teams in the NFC Championship this coming year. I believe Goff has this job in firm control. He went the last 9 games without a turnover. And my opinion with this team is I don't think Hendon Hooker's going to see the field unless it's blowout games this year. So neither of those two teams I have, and neither of those two players I have making the playoffs. However, going to Anthony Richardson, this is an interesting one. I'm going to work back. So Anthony Richardson, he has a great mentor in Shane Steichen, Eagles offensive coordinator, big reason why Jalen Hurts was as successful as he was last year. But this is the Jacksonville Jaguars division to lose. Even though the Indianapolis Colts have a good trio of offensive weapons in Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, the new receiver that they got, who's a speedy receiver, and Jonathan Taylor, who will help Richardson grow tremendously, I'm not entirely sure that the offensive line can hold up their end of the bargain for a player that likes to run. Now, this defense is not as bad as some may think with guys like Shaq Leonard, DeForest Buckner, EJ Speed, but this is an interesting team. I really think that this is a team that years 2 and 3 with Steichen will be very, very good, but this right now is the Jacksonville Jaguars team to lose unless they can win 10 games, which is looking unlikely. I don't think Anthony Richardson makes the playoffs. Could be a flyer, but really, this AFC is so stacked, I don't see it happening. Moving to CJ Stroud, Houston Texans quarterback, this division is also in flux. Of course, this is the same division that Anthony Richardson is in. This is the Jaguars' job, as I said, to lose with a solid quarterback option with Lawrence. I don't believe there's enough offensive weapons for the Houston Texans to compete in the AFC. In fact, I really could see the Houston Texans potentially, I mean, it's going to be bold with me saying this, but I could see the Texans potentially finishing with a top 5 draft pick. And it's not because CJ Stroud would be bad. It's just because the AFC is that good. And there's not enough weapons for Stroud outside of John Mechie, Nico Collins, and Robert Woods, as well as Tank Dell, those receivers. They're good. I think they have especially John Mechie and Tank Dell. I think there's an avenue to be good, but they're not good yet, and they're not great, definitely. And I'm not sure if this defense is capable of keeping them in the game. I know they have guys like Will Anderson, who is a guy they drafted, who they have a lot of hopes for, and I have a lot of hopes for too. But this is a team that's still a couple of years off. I really like DeMeco Ryans. I think he's going to make an excellent coach. Again, he's a defensive coach. The question is, can defensive coach win playoff games and make it to the Super Bowl? The odds are stacked against defensive coaches. I do believe it will happen at some point soon, but not this year, and definitely not too high on the Houston Texans making the playoffs. The one team that I really think is going to make the playoffs, and I've said this before earlier in this episode, is the Carolina Panthers and Bryce Young. This division is probably the most in flux for who will represent the division in the playoffs. So my biggest thing is this. The Panthers have the 27th easiest schedule. All of the NFC South, however, ranks 22 through 32 in strength of schedule. The Bucs have the 22nd easiest, the Saints have the 31st, and the Falcons have the 32nd. But the one question that every team has is at QB. And the question that I have is Bryce Young the best quarterback in the division? I know it's going to be throwing shade on 2 veteran quarterbacks. I'm not sold on Baker Mayfield with the Bucs, and I just don't know if Derek Carr is going to live up to the team's expectation. So my thought is, of all the quarterbacks that were drafted in the draft this year, the most likely to make the playoffs is Bryce Young. However, I don't see the NFC South sending 2 teams. So if Bryce Young doesn't win the division, then I don't think the Panthers make it. But if they get a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who I would highly encourage the Panthers to do, then I could see this being a very, 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 very big possibility that the Bryce Young leads his team to the playoffs in his rookie year. So that's my opinion. Of course, that's a bold topic because, I still think that Baker Mayfield and Derek Carr can prove me wrong, and they have the abilities to with some of those weapons on offense, especially for Baker Mayfield with guys like Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But I still could see the Panthers making life difficult for all of these teams in this division, let alone winning some games out of the division. If they go 4-2 or 5-1, they may only need 10 games to make the playoffs, even if it's a wild card team, which I don't think it will, because I think if you win 10 or 11 games in this division, you're going to win the division. So With that being said, that caps off my 7 biggest topics. Will Aaron Rodgers experience be a success? Will Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts live up to their contract expectations? Will Jimmy Garoppolo be on the Raiders roster week 1? Which team will shock the NFL this year for better or worse? Will the NFC East have a repeat division winner? Can anybody challenge the Kansas City Chiefs for AFC dominance? And which rookie quarterback is most likely to make the playoffs? You heard it from me over the last 45 minutes. I gave you guys my opinion. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode. I've had a lot of fun. Remember, this episode is going to air at the Long John podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also find it on Twitter at the Long John Pod. Remember to check me out on social media at Twitter at the Long John Pod, as well as on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at the Long John Podcast. Again, it's your host, Joseph Camperman, and tonight has been truly a blast. Thanks, guys.